Right. Got a nice crowd today. Let me put my mode on. Right. Okay. So today we are going to be tackling a juicy topic, which I'm sure we've all had to face at some stage. This is part of a I'm doing some advertising. So I do a 1.5 day course on recognition, feedback, and difficult conversations. So I've taken the feedback component, and this is what I'm going to what I'm presenting to you in a nugget, because I'm also a great believer, as you know, if you've attended my past webinars on nuggets of information. And feedback is an exceptionally powerful word. So the first thing I wanted to ask you all, and you can pop it in the chat, is when somebody says to you, or let's rather say when in your past life or in your current life, when your line manager calls you in or calls you and comes to your desk and said, I need to give you some feedback. What are the thoughts that come into your mind? If somebody says to you, I need to give you some feedback, even your partner at home, right? So I need to give you some feedback. What comes to mind? Please pop it into the chat. Yes, you think you're in trouble? Oh, what have I done? What did I do wrong? So I'm picking up a theme. Most of the time it feels negative. It's not good. The problem. Anybody got a different view? So yes, generally, majority we're going to have a negative connotation to feedback. So I like to, as you've seen in most of my webinars, take the neuroscience approach to most things, because once we understand how the brain works, that is almost our guiding light as to how we should handle and tackle many concepts. So feedback, once again, is like most of these human skills. It is something we can learn and get better at. And for those of you in positions of leadership and business, it's a essential concept for you to practice more effectively and perhaps plant the correct seed or use it correctly, so that people that are reporting it to you are not going to have the same feeling of feedback as you do. Fortunately, the generation coming into the workplace at the moment, the Z's and the Y's, tend to be more open to asking for feedback. Whereas the baby boomers and the Gen Xers aren't particularly good at asking for feedback or even receiving feedback. So in some ways, those of you who are not a Y or a Z, it might be quite uncomfortable for those people that are reporting to you. They actually are requesting feedback from you, because in the past it was deemed to be inappropriate or unprofessional to request feedback. You have to wait for your line manager to give you feedback, and what tends to happen is that never happens, does it? Until you're either getting an award or you're about to be dismissed. That's how we normally know whether we are are doing an effective job or not. So these are just some questions I want to just plant out there. It would be nice for you to just pop into the chat what you would like to walk away with in an hour's time, or what brings you to this workshop. Maybe there's a story behind that. Or what is the best piece of developmental feedback you've ever received? And what is probably the worst piece of feedback you ever received? And those are quite interesting questions, because we've all possibly received feedback that's been helpful, and we receive feedback that's been pretty damaging or unhelpful. So think about that. Pop your answers into the chat. So you can answer all of those questions if you want to, or you can just select one. And we may take a couple and use them at the end during the question and answer. So throughout this webinar, if you've got any questions you want me to tackle, please place them in the question and answer, and I will tackle them at the end. But for now, answer these in the chat, please, so we can just see. Also give me a guide. Okay, so Greg says some tips to get better at giving feedback and how to get valuable feedback for myself. Brilliant. That's very EQ of you, Greg, because that's really the power of asking somebody else. Because I personally have not always been comfortable with receiving feedback. I could give feedback, but I never liked it when people gave me feedback, particularly when it was something that maybe was was potentially a bit negative, or maybe tackled my very own belief system. So I'm going to give you definitely going to get some tips out of that. Anybody else? What brings you to the workshop? What you'd like to walk away with? What is the best piece of development feedback you've ever been given by somebody? And what's the worst? Because by sharing those two answers to those two, it's quite helpful, because we probably all receive both, some good and some bad. And you can take me back to your school days, your study days, your work days. Give you a moment to think and reflect. We must not fear silence. Silence is wonderful. Thank you, Pernell. I'd like to find tools to receive negative feedback as well as giving negative feedback to others. Okay, so thank you for that. So today's session is really about developmental feedback, but you will find that even if you have to give difficult feedback, maybe we should stop using some of our language around negativity or developmental or solution-focused feedback. The tips are exactly the same. The language you use, the tips that we learned today is going to help. Okay. It won't work because it didn't work in the past. Oh, thank you for that. That's Marshni. That's a typical shocking feedback. Best feedback, an open discussion about how something can be done better. Nothing was disregarded and was honest on both sides. So it's an opportunity for people to share and to talk about something rather than it being one-sided. Absolutely. Cool. So you can carry on popping that in. I'll get back to that now. Right. So a nice symbol for feedback is petrol or fuel. As we know, it's quite a costly thing at the moment. Hopefully, I believe it's coming down next month. But it really, feedback, if you want a definition, feedback is giving somebody fuel to continue what you are doing more effectively. So it's identifying what somebody is doing and then encouraging them to doing more of it. And as I said, when I tackle this in the world of work, we start with recognition, because as humans, we need to better understand the word recognition. That moves on to feedback. And then once we've really grasped feedback, then actually we can handle what we call the difficult conversations. So let's listen to some wise souls in this field. I'm sure you've all heard of Simon Sinek. So I just wanted, this is a very short clip that Simon has on feedback.
So one of the things that we do is is creating a culture in which people understand that the reason we're giving feedback is not to quote unquote criticize them, but to help them grow as human beings. And that has to be established. Like this is what the advice I offer is, it's not just a checklist that you do and everything goes fine. You know, you create a culture in which difficult conversations and critical feedback are welcomed or at least understood. But it's also how we give it. Usually we give it by pulling out a piece of paper and pointing out the thing that's wrong. And saying you've got to fix something, right? We usually point to the evidence first, as opposed to starting by the human being, which is, there's stuff I want to share with you. I don't know what it means, but I wanted to raise it with you in case there is an issue, because I care about you and I want to see that you grow here. But there's some evidence that things are going a little sideways, and I want to address them with them to see what opportunities there are, or if there's anything wrong, because I don't know the reasons behind it. But here's, for example, the way you talked to your teammates the other day was a little harsh. And ordinarily, I'd be one to say, "Oh, you're having a bad day. It's no problem. Everybody gets a bad day." But you've been really beating up on people. I don't even know if you're aware of that, right? And sometimes they'll say, "I'm having a hard time," and it opens up. Or they'll say, "I wasn't even aware. I didn't even know." Or it reveals something, as opposed to saying, "Stop yelling at people. Nobody wants to work for you if all you do is yell at people." It's hard for people to receive. And so good feedback is not just about conveying the point we're trying to make. It's about creating a condition in which the person is more likely to listen and hear it. So we're all proud of ourselves once we've told them, did you give her the feedback? Yeah, I told her, right? Did they hear the feedback? Different question.
Right. So he is always one of my go-to peeps when it comes to the subject matter. And why I introduced you to that is if we start always from the basis of empathy, and trying to better understand, because I think we often make the assumption that we know, but we don't have all the information. So as he says, and which my wife and I often debate, I always say it's how you say something, okay? Because you do want someone to not get their backs up, and you do want, think about those of you who have children, to get defensive, because as soon as we attack, what happens, the amygdala in our brain, in the middle of our brain, as soon as we attack somebody, your frontal cortex, which is your thinking, is released, and your amygdala takes over. So that's fight, flight, or freeze. So when we attack somebody verbally, the amygdala is waiting for the danger. And as soon as you attack somebody verbally, we get defensive and we get reaction. So he made some very valid points. And what did come out in what he was saying, which we're going to tackle now when we look at the next clip, is around being specific, because we tend to be really vague around giving feedback. So let's watch the next short clip.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. And there's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, or move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. What we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay.
Right. So we're going to now look at that 4-part formula and break it down. Once again, I want to just emphasize the focus on neuroscience and neuroplasticity. Meaning in simple layman's terms is that we have the ability to learn new concepts and learn new things. So yes, the more we practice something, the more it becomes entrenched in our brains. But when we grasp and tackle something new, we can create a new neuro pathway in our brain. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment before we start, just to check the comments. Right, I've only received negative feedback, so I had to struggle through turning that into positive results. Would like to be able to give staff on the go informal, constant, positive and negative feedback to give motivation up. I would like to learn about how to encourage people to give and receive feedback. Fantastic. Well, fortunately, I'm covering all of that, so we are on track. Let me share my screen again. So I think it's very important, as I said, why we tackle it, not in a structured academic approach, which we could easily, because if you do research around the subject matter, there's plenty of information that you could actually tackle on this subject matter. But for true behavior change to take place, we actually have to delve into how the brain actually works. Right.
But important, it lets the brain
Using to stop playing. Let's get to the end.
5 minutes of time. I share the pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. Here you name exactly how that data point
Okay. Good work. Right, there we go. Right, so the formula that she refers to in the clip, although the language might be American, I'm going to translate it into South Africanism, as we learned on the rugby field on last Saturday. I'm going to convert it so that we can understand it. The first one is microfeedback, data point, or show impact, and end on a question. So in other words, we're going to look at the most effective way to give somebody feedback, and we're going to use some examples as we go through it. Okay, so the first one is when we tackle feedback, and in this concept is called micro feedback. Always give feedback in nuggets. Okay, so a short question, and to make the person aware that feedback is coming, because what you ultimately want is the buy-in. So for example, is to say, hey, hey David, can we talk about what happened yesterday? Or hey, David, I just want to get your idea on the project that we're going to start on Monday. So you're making a person aware, and from a neuroscience perspective, you're actually tackling what they call as the frontal cortex. So you're saying, hello, rationality. I'm coming to speak to you. It's not a danger. Amygdala, you don't need to react, because I'm coming to you to say, hey, David, I'm being clear about what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what happened yesterday. I want to talk about the incident that happened earlier in the office when you arrived at work. Okay. So as I said there, it's allowing the person to be aware that feedback is coming, to prepare themselves. What psychologists tell us, it's almost giving the person permission to accept it rather than to turn it down, because it's encouraging, rather than you're not attacking the person. Okay. And this is the power of the buy-in. The second component is the data points, okay, which Simon also referred to. So when you give feedback, you need to then be specific about what it's about. Watch out for the blur words or the vagueness, which most of us tend to be guilty of, and I am one of those, because I don't want to potentially upset people, and I tend to take either a long, windy journey to get to where I want to go to, and often I get lost on that journey, and the person listening gets confused, or they don't realize the importance of what I'm actually saying. So it's to be very specific, to say, hey, David, I want to give you some feedback about the incident that happened between you and Tandeka this morning. I want to sit down and talk about how we can resolve that or better handle it better. There's no I don't know what he's talking about. So I think that's where the courage comes in, to name it. As we've learned in some of our past webinars, emotions and feelings, the key is to name the emotion and feeling, not to judge it, not to see it as a bad and a good feeling. And I'm glad a lot of you used the word negative and positive, because maybe that's also what we've got to shift our mindset. We're not there to attack somebody or destroy somebody, as Simon says. We're there to hopefully resolve and to fix. So think about that. When we're giving feedback, what is our intention? Are we going in there to correct, or are we going in there to destroy? Because I think when we're angry, which is an acceptable emotion, but it's how we execute that anger. So when we're going in with your children, with your partner, with your team leader, with your line manager, with your team, it's my intent to go in to fix, not to destroy. Okay. So the last point there is to convert it. So you actually want to convert all those bits and pieces, all those blur words, and bring it into one concise statement or sentence. So when I run this in person, this is when we actually do role plays, and you actually practice, and you get scenarios to engage and to practice these four steps. Okay, so the third step is then to show impact. Another one we often miss out on. Excuse me. So you can actually say how it impacted you, or how it impacted the team, or how it impacted the relationship. So name it, the incident, and then say what it's done. It's affected the morale. It's affected the mood. It resulted in us losing sales. It resulted in us not meeting target. It resulted us in not finishing on time. Because you didn't submit your report by midday today, I was unable to add it to the board pack. So then you've got cut on by your line manager. So you must, and you can get personal here. You can say it upset me, it hurt me, it frustrated me, it made me sad. Because remember, you are a human being. So tell the story around it. Okay. Because our brains, remember, our brains love a story. Give me a story and I'm going to remember. If you just give me facts and bullet points, I'm not going to remember. And then the final one is end on a question. So now you tying it up. You've told me what happened, or what you want to do, what you want to achieve, how it's affected me, how it's impacted me, and then to say, do you understand? How do you see this? Do you see it differently? What are your thoughts? Remember, you are putting it out there to hook in the other person. You're not saying this is how it's going to be. And a lot of you might argue and saying, but I have to say it how it is because we work in a fast-paced environment. Go back to the short-term pain, long-term gain. All of you that run a team, manage a team, facilitate other people, oversee other people, relationship building is key. There's a hormone called oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. Okay, so you also call it the love hormone, but it's how human beings connect. Okay, if you want a more effective relationship with the children, with your partner, with your mother-in-law, with your team, with your line manager, we have to bond, we have to connect. Okay, so as much as you want to try and debate that and argue that, at our core, and it's backed up by science and research, is that it's about relationships. That is the most effective way as human beings that we can participate in the world and are more content and happier people and more productive people if we have healthy relationships. And where does that come from? It comes from bonding, and it comes from the hormone called oxytocin. Okay. So there we go. Microfeedback, chunks, open the conversation so the person knows what's coming. Data points, be specific, be clear, don't be vague. Show the impact, say what's it caused. Think about all those things in your own environments. All of you come from different industries. Think about the impact that it has, so the person knows, because once again, we assume that somebody knows, but they don't always know. Okay, so create the story around it, and then finally bring them in. Check on them. What are they feeling? What are they thinking? They're a human being too. They need to be involved. And the last bullet point there is commitment. So we need the commitment to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or that they are completely clear about what is going to happen. So as I said to in the work environment, in the workshop that I run, this is when you actually do the practice exercises, which are obviously very powerful. So as I said, this is the middle component of the whole leading performance process. You've got to understand recognition to give feedback. Once you understand feedback, then you can actually, which might be another webinar that we can have, is around the bold conversations, because I think that's the one that scares people, having that really difficult conversation. So you've given feedback, nothing is changing. So now I've actually got to have a bold conversation. And the bold conversation is the one that, if the bold conversation doesn't bring about change, because I often get asked this question, when does the disciplinary process kick in? Well, that's after the bold conversation. That's when the disciplinary process has to kick in, because you've done everything in your power. You've been fair. You've given people opportunity to change, to improve. You've given timelines. You've been clear, concise. They still haven't changed. Have the bold conversation. They do not meet the expectations. Then you can proceed with the disciplinary process. So remember, the disciplinary process is like the death sentence. That's the one that we should not have to get to as human beings, because if we've actually got relationships, we should not get there. But in reality, once again, because we are human beings, you can do everything in your power to support, encourage, help. But if a person doesn't want to change their behavior, that's why we have to almost, because what you're doing there, you're actually breaking the relationship in a way. You're saying, you refuse to partake, so now we actually have to follow the grievance procedure, or the disciplinary procedure. So why is it important? We hear this term, so what? This is why. It helps to drive peak performance. It helps people learn and grow and improve personal satisfaction. As employees, you're all employees. Some of you may be owners. Quite simply, if you care and grow for people, they will look after your company. You personally, if you feel that you're not cared for or you've been not being grown by your organization, you're not going to give your most or your best. And in the cultural terms, we talk about disengagement. So when you become disengaged, it's because you feel I'm not cared for and my company's not growing. So you see how we tend to overcomplicate concepts. Think about it. Think about, you may not have control over your whole organization, but you have control over your team. Am I caring? Am I growing my team? Is my line manager caring for me? Is my line manager growing me? So that obviously leads to improved business performance. Everybody, if you're creating assignments, there's a culture of feedback, that it doesn't become formalized, that it's often and it's regular and it's clear, that you're open to it. It creates a culture of, how's this? A culture of innovation and creativity. Because once you allow feedback, you also creating that safe space. And now I've had a webinar on psychological safety. So much there, so much still to understand, because most organizations are still playing lip service to it. They use the language, but they don't practice. If people don't share, it's because they're not feeling safe to share. If you're not sharing, why? I don't feel safe to share with my line manager. And look at the last point. It creates a culture of honesty and open communication. Okay. So then we can speak to our colleagues, even if it's a colleague, if it's a team member that's not performing, that often the line manager does not have to get involved because the team sorts it out. This team has healthy and honest conversations with each other. So what stops us from giving feedback? I should have asked you this question. Okay. It's often because we don't know how to approach it. As you said right in the beginning, we see it as negative. And we're also not sure of what the effects might be. Whoa, we don't know where it's going to go. There's a difficult employee, this difficult team member. If I tackle it, it could open a can of worms. And this is when we fall into that terrible trap, when we avoid. There's avoidance syndrome. So we don't tackle the problem or the person, and it perpetuates and the bad behavior continues, doesn't it? Other people notice, and then people start saying, but you're being unfair to me, and you being a favorite to that person. For example, the most common one we hear is late coming, that you allow the person to keep on coming late and keep on coming late, and it frustrates you and it irritates you and annoys you. And then another one of your team members comes late and you come down hard on them. And they say to you, but look at David. David's always coming late. It's because you've never tackled it. You have avoided it. And why can I speak like this? Is because I have been guilty of just that. Okay. It will come back to bite you in the backside if we don't tackle things up front. And just to touch on this slide, as I mentioned earlier, we can actually look at how generations, and most of my courses people they want to spend lots of time talking about the generational issue, because it's a guide. It's not cast in stone. Remember that. Nothing is boxed. And sometimes we on the cusp. Sometimes we might be a Gen X, but we align more to Gen Y. So that's probably just because where we are potentially born. But if you look at the traditionalists, they came before the baby boomers, so most of them are not around anymore. They have retired, okay, because they were born before 1945. Okay, their philosophy around feedback was no news is good news. There was no such thing as feedback actually. It just wasn't ingrained in anybody's culture. Baby boomers came along, and they like this really structured once a year, which still exists in many organizations, because there's still some baby boomers heading up large organizations. So they're still sitting with this outdated culture. Gen Xers, which is obviously the best generation. I'm not being biased at all. No, I am. They preferred more regular weekly, so they really introduced, Gen Xers introduced most things. Actually, they introduced the concept of weekly or daily feedback, and moved away from this whole negative, that feedback is negative. It was more about let's be more constructive. This word we use it a lot in business. It's not so popular anymore. It's constructive feedback. Okay. Gen Ys came along and they demand it. Okay. They don't wait for it. They demand it, and they want lots of it, and they want to know how they're doing, and they want it to be very specific. Okay. I can sense your head's nodding. Because you can relate if you're Gen Y, and if you've got Gen Ys reporting into you, and most of you might have Gen Y children or Gen Z children, you go, I can understand that. Okay. And then the Gen Zs, it's just this, remember they in a world of just constant everything. Everything is constant. They just have access to everything. Information is just never ending. So their feedback is continuous, and they really want to be honest and open. The Gen Ys don't necessarily want you to be honest and open. They just give me feedback because they know they're supposed to get it. But I think the Gen Zs might actually tend to do the opposite. They actually take it to heart. So potentially more sensitive than the Gen Ys to feedback. But because what they call digital innates, it's just part of who they are. So I think this is such an interesting link to, because we talk about generations from many aspects, but from a feedback perspective, I think it's quite interesting. So there's a quick summary. Traditionalists or conservative communicators don't make it too personal, don't do personal. Separate worlds, personal life, work life, they never come together. Don't express their feelings and their thoughts. Baby boomers are all about meetings, meetings, both face-to-face and electronic, although they still battle with the electronic meeting situation. Gen Xers require proof, quick and direct, no time for chit-chat, prefer electronic communication as it's more efficient. Millennials need more feedback because they think they are more capable than they actually are. Emphasize autonomy and collaboration. Then you've got them. Focus on those concepts, and you've won them over. And very participatory. So it's very exhausting for baby boomers because there's no such thing as participation. And the millennials are going, I want to be included. And then Gen Zs are just really open. It's normal, it's natural. And they might be distracted by their devices, but and want frequent discussions. Okay. And at this point, I just wanted to tap into parent, adult, child. Transactional analysis is a fancy word, but it's to remind us when we're giving feedback to not to be hooked into the child role or the parent role. So the we tend to be parents when we're giving feedback. Because think about a parent is someone that's authoritative, and they're coming to correct and fix or nurture. And we often hear in business when managers say, these are my children, or they say, our manager's like our mother. It sounds wonderful, but actually it's not that healthy because they're not your children, okay? And they are adults. So you're an adult, doesn't matter what age that Gen Z is, they are adults. We're bringing adults into the work environment. So we must treat each other like adults, not treat your team like they are your children, and not to think that you are the parent of your team. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and I'm sure you've come across this, but it's a constant reminder. As you know, when I do webinars, it's about being practical. So think about it. When you're sitting down in front of having to give feedback whether it's developmental or as you guys like to talk about, negative feedback, you're talking to another adult. So you're not talking to a child, and you're not there to destroy them or to put them down. You're trying to make something better. Okay, so it really shifts your mindset. So it's like when we call it the fixed versus the growth mindset. You're going with a growth mindset to repair something, not to destroy something with your feedback. If there's that one line you can take away with you. When I'm giving feedback, I'm not there to destroy. I'm there to repair or to fix or to correct. So linked to what we spoke about earlier, when you're referring to adult communication, it's to ask questions. This is just a reminder of what we spoke about earlier, to ask questions, to state facts, to ask for an opinion, and to get the input. Okay. So in a way, it's actually nice to print out something like this. Okay, and you will have access to these slides. So every time you're going into discussion, whether it's formal or informal, to remember what's my intent. And we're going to end off with a lovely slide by Brene Brown just now. Ask the right questions, state the facts, be clear, don't be vague, get the input, and make sure they have their buy-in. This is what I obviously would unpack in far more detail in the workshop. But there are 5 foundations when giving feedback. So this is more of an academic terminology. You want to be objective. You want to be specific. You want to be timely. There's the thing, not delaying it, not drawing it out. How many times have you said, I'm going to tackle something on the Friday, and you go, oh, no, I'll do it on the Monday, and the Monday comes, you go, oh, no, it's so busy. Monday's report day. I'm not feeling so well today, or the person's on leave tomorrow. I'll do it next week. And then it never happens. Consistent and sincere. Oh, we're going to talk about sincerity just now when we look at the last slide. So your intent, am I going in as again? And I've said this 100 times this morning. What is your intent when you go in to give feedback? To destroy. You might be angry, you might be upset. Okay, breathe. Remember the four breath technique. Breathe. Anger is an acceptable emotion, but how are you getting the message across? Are you going to build somebody up or destroy them? Right. So I have made sure that we've got time to also watch this. We're not going to watch the whole clip, but there's some very good examples here. So this is a clip targeted at the medical profession, but it's very universal. You can use it in actually in all environments.
A couple months ago, I was in New York City, and I was doing training for a large anesthesiology practice, and I had a bunch of practice managers associated with a hospital. And after the training, this one practice manager comes up to me, and she says, I have someone who's not performing. I said, okay. And she said, well, I keep stripping away parts of her job, trying to leave her something she can do. And I said, okay. And she said, well, there's not much of the job left. I said, okay. I said, how long has this been going on? And she looked up, she paused, she thought for a second, and she said, 4 years. Now, here's the thing that's kind of sad. It's actually not that uncommon, right? Like, how many of you have someone who can't merge to an EMR system? It's a nurse, she's been there 35 years, you love her, she's like family, but she can't make the change. And we know we need to do something, but we like her, so we feel like we can't. So I said to this practice manager, I said, well, why haven't you said anything? She said, well, I really like her, and it's hard. I'll give you another one. I was doing training in Boulder. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I had about 65 people. Where are the Colorado people? Woo! And I had about 65 people. and they were an in-tech group. So it'd be like if I had your whole office, right? And I was hired to help them be more candid. That was my job, help teams be more candid. And I had them all day, 9 to 4. And in the front of the room right here, this guy is sitting with his teammates, and all day long, he has a booger right here. Booger. Now, when you have a booger right here, what's the only thing you can see? Is the booger, right? Like, there's no head, there's no body, there's just this booger. Now, tell me why all day nobody talks to the guy about the booger. Why is that? They didn't want to what? They didn't want to make him feel bad, and they didn't want to embarrass him. So let me ask you a question. Which is worse? For someone to be like, dude, or to let him walk around with the booger all day? What would you prefer if it was you? But we have this thing that it's not nice to tell people the truth, right? We have this thing, we're nice people, it's not nice. So I'm gonna start a sentence and I want you to finish it, okay? You ready? If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Who taught you that? Your mommy. So it's mommy's fault that there's not more candor in the workplace. So here's what we're gonna do in our time together today. I'm gonna give you an 8-step formula to say the hardest things that you've been avoiding. I'm gonna demo how to tell someone to put the girls away, how to tell someone they smell, how to tell someone not to text in front of patients, and how to tell someone that she or he has a bad attitude. So last year I spoke in San Diego and I had about 100 of you, and I called a handful of you before this conference and I said, I have 15 minutes to demo hard conversations. What are the hard conversations you want me to demo? So I'm gonna demo those conversations. Now, at the end of my time, if you feel nauseous, you're like, I cannot tell someone she smells. I cannot, I will have you do it. Then I want you to come to my breakout session tomorrow morning at 8:30, okay? I'm doing a breakout session at 8:30 called How to Say Anything to Anyone, which is the title of my book. During that session, you will get an expanded version of this, and you will learn how to create an environment where you can say what you want without wishing you had taken medication. That is legal where I live. I just had to say that. But I'm clearly not using any of that myself. Okay, are you ready? All right, here's how you tell someone to put the girls away. Now, for the people who are not clear what that means, cleavage, people, too much cleavage. I feel very passionately about this. Here we go, you ready? Step 1, introduce the conversation. Hey, do you have a second? I need to talk to you. Step 2, I've noticed that some of the clothing you're wearing shows quite a bit of cleavage. Step 3, state the impact of that behavior. When people look at you and think about you in this office, I want them thinking about how smart you are and all that you bring to our practice. I don't want them distracted with something else. Step 5, ask her for her take on the situation. What are your thoughts? Now, what you should expect to get is a massive amount of defensiveness. And if she doesn't get defensive, you should call an ambulance. Now, I'm not kidding, because people are wired to get defensive. And some of us are waiting, right? We are waiting to have these conversations for the right time, right? You're like, well, I got this person who's not performing, but I'm just waiting for the right time. That time is not gonna come, people, right? You're waiting for the moment that she's gonna be receptive. Guess what? It's not coming. So when she gets defensive or starts to cry or kills you off or raises her voice, you just go, aha, she is breathing. Sweet, right? And she is not smoking that stuff that in Boulder is so prevalent. So you keep going, and she says whatever she says, and you say, okay, can I make a suggestion or request? You say, I want you to go to Ann Taylor. And Ann Taylor sells these camisoles that are really high and nylon, and they're $16 on sale, and they come in every color. And just wear it under everything, because when you sit down, it won't get any lower. Now, men are like, what does she mean? Women, you know what I mean, right? Like when we sit down, sometimes things, they just get lower. And then you say to her, would you be willing to do that? And the last thing you say is, thanks for having this conversation with me. I know it was awkward. Now, how many of you are thinking, there is no way I can do that without dying? You can, you can. I want you to have the mind frame that when you tell people the truth, you do them a favor. To let your employees proliferate in a job where they are not being successful or where people are talking smack about them, meaning gossip, does not do them a favor. Now, tomorrow morning, what I'm going to talk about is how do I create a relationship with my doctors and my staff and our partners and our vendors and our patients where we can tell the truth. So if any of this feels difficult, come tomorrow, okay? Now, if I had not done a debrief as I went, step 1, step 2, step 3, if I had just run through it, how long would that have taken me? A minute, 2 minutes, or 10 minutes? 2 minutes. Good feedback is 2 minutes. People would rather hear that they're not cutting it for 2 minutes rather than 20, right? They don't want to hear that they smell for 20 minutes. They want you to tell them, and they want to get out and tell anyone who will listen what an idiot you are. So faster is better, okay? So I'm going to keep demoing the formula. Now, I'm clearly following an 8-step formula that I don't have with me today. It's in my head, but I want to give it to you. So everybody write this down. This is a website, and I've posted the formula for you, and you can go pull it down, okay? Because the formula, if you follow it, it will work for you every time. Now, by the way, gentlemen, you cannot tell a woman to put the girls away. I don't care how badly you want to. You need to have another woman in the practice do that. Now, if you're the practice manager and you're a man, and all your staff are women, and you got someone with the girls hanging out, you find someone that woman has a relationship with, and you say, listen, will you have this conversation for me? You can't have it. If you do choose to have it, please have a witness, because it is a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. All right, are we ready for how to tell someone they smell? Okay, good. You ready? Hey, when you have 2 minutes, I need to talk to you. 2 minutes. Do it in a private setting, behind a closed door, not in front of other people, not in Cubeland. If you don't have a private environment, go to Starbucks, where other people you know are not there. And you say, hey, I've noticed that you have an odor. That's it, people. 6 words. I've noticed you have an odor. We work in a small environment here, and I never want someone to not want to work with you because of this. Now, I know this is very awkward. It's awkward for me, and I'm sure it's awkward for you, but I'd much rather you hear this from me than somebody else. What are your thoughts? And then he'll say, or she'll say, whatever they say. I work out over lunch, and I don't shower, and oh my gosh, I can't believe you're telling me this, and right? Now, I have found that most people you say this stuff to, they actually know. Like, I was dating this guy a couple years ago, and it was before my book came out. And in the book, here's the book. In the book, there's a whole section on how to tell someone they smell. And he was reading the manuscript before it was printed, and his name was, well, I can't tell you his name. That wouldn't be fine. Bob. And Bob says to me, I think I'm in your book, right? And I was like, what? Because Bob smelled, so I told him he smelled, right? Because I'm candid. And he's like, I think I'm in your book. And I was like, oh no, I always teach that. It's not pertinent to you. Now, how many of you would like a copy of this book?
Right. We're going to have to end it there, but I do recommend, I'm going to pop it in the chat to the site, Candid Conversations. It's really cool, and there are lots of lovely videos and clips that you can watch, and obviously the book too. They should be paying me for promoting it, but it is really, really helpful because you see how practical it is. So she really took the steps, her own version of the steps that I shared with you earlier, the formula, and you see how important it is to be direct, to be clear, to the point, and then the other examples are obviously there. So I just want to share my screen again to get to the last slides before I tackle any questions. Yeah, we can take any questions at the end. Any comments? I just want to. Right. Right, as I said before, I tackle check your chats. Last slide I want to share on feedback, and as I said earlier, you will have access to all this content. Is I know when I'm ready to give feedback when, and this to me, if you print this out and keep this with you, you ain't going to go wrong. So this is from Brene Brown, and it takes practice because some of these points you're going to go, whoa, that's stretching it a tad. I'm ready to sit next to you rather than across from you. So there's just the psychological symbolism next to you rather than across from you. I'm willing to put the problem in front of us rather than between us. I'm ready to listen, ask questions, and accept that I may not fully understand the issue. I want to acknowledge what you do well instead of picking you apart. So there's the destroy, not. I recognize your strengths and how you can use them to address your challenges. I can hold you accountable without shaming or blaming. You don't have to shame and blame somebody to hold them accountable. I'm willing to play my own part, to own my own part because I could have contributed to it. I can genuinely thank you for the efforts rather than criticize you. I can talk about how resolving these challenges will lead to your growth and opportunity, because isn't that what I'm doing? Am I not giving you feedback to improve, to grow you? And I can model, and this is very big in Brene Brown's teachings, to be vulnerable and open. So maybe it's about also sharing your past errors and mistakes and challenges, because by sharing that, you will show the person that you're engaging with that that you're human too. Okay, that is my story. Let's somebody had their hand up, and are there any questions or anything you want me to tackle that we have discovered? Siobhan, I think we can have you unmuted so you can speak. Maybe I can do it now. I can't. Siobhan, do you want to just type your question or comment in? So please pop in any questions that you have. I know we've reached our time, but we've had lots of fun, and hopefully some practical tools that you can take away with you and go and practice. Greg, what do you do if you try and follow the steps, but at the end of the conversation, you sense the message still hasn't landed well? Good one. So either the person has not taken it or grasped it, or not taking ownership, or are still being very defensive. Be honest about it. You can say, I still feel that you're not grasping the severity of what I've said. Do you clearly understand the impact? Maybe that's a direct approach. Or it's about giving what's powerful, is about giving. We all need time to improve. So if it's about performance related and you need them to improve, so they didn't meet the target, or the mail they sent out was unprofessional, or the way they coming to work late, or whatever, you give them a timeline. So to say, we're going to meet again on this date at this time to see if there's been any improvement. Because if there has not been any improvement, then we're going to have a bold conversation, which means if that's not resolved, then we're going to have to follow the disciplinary process. So it's important to actually say that if it's important and it's serious, because by being vague about it, saying, oh, I hope it's all sorts out, I'm sure you don't want to get fired, be very clear about it. I think that's what we need to learn, is to be clear. But as that Brene Brown quote says, it's about doing it with empathy. And as I've said numerous times, not to destroy, because you can't change other people. So as much as we're following the correct process here, so we're following the steps, we're following the formula, whatever it is, and we're being clear, we're being direct, there's still no guarantee that the person is going to take it on and change their ways, because it's their behavior that has to change. Okay, well, hopefully that answers your question. Marshall, thank you so much. Please share your workshop details. I will do that. I'm just going to type in Candid Conversations. That's the website that has amazing clips. And the one that I took earlier, and you can finish watching that clip. And I'm just dropping in my email address. If you want to contact me about my workshop, and this is my number. Otherwise, you are all free to go. Thank you for staying in and going over the time limit. And I wish you well. And please don't forget to go and practice. Practice in front of the mirror if you have to. Write it down. Practice. Line up your children. Line up your partner, your mother-in-law. Because it should be a regular and common occurrence feedback. It shouldn't be seen as something only when there's a problem. Because if we're giving constant feedback, we know what's happening and we're on track and we're in the know. But if we do it on this ridiculous once a year, so your organizations might still be, dare I say it, outdated. And if you have got the power to challenge that, please do challenge the status quo. This monthly formal performance review, you do the research, back it up by research to show that it's pretty ineffective, and we need to shift and do, especially because we looked at the generational situation. You've got a generation coming through that wants it often and regular, and it actually takes away all the academics and the structure of formalization if you do it regularly. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope it was beneficial, and I will see you all next time. Take care. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So please get in touch with me if you want to find out more about my workshop or what other offerings that I have. Thank you. Cheers, everybody.